The cry in the darkness. Nathan Daniels had always found solace in the late hours of the night. The quiet stillness after a long day of work gave him the chance to unwind, to let his mind drift and forget about the pressures of his job. As a physician running his own small clinic in a modest downtown area, he had seen his share of tragedies, pain, and suffering. But there was something about the tranquility of the night that gave him peace, a break from the chaos that often followed him home. That evening, however, the calm would be shattered in a way Nathan could never have anticipated. As Nathan locked the doors to his clinic, he felt the familiar autumn chill creeping in from the outside, the air crisp with the scent of wet leaves and the fading remnants of summer. He pulled his coat tighter around his body, adjusting the collar to shield his neck from the breeze. The sound of his footsteps echoed down the empty street as he made his way to his car, parked several blocks away. It had been another exhausting day, a mixture of routine checkups and the occasional emergency. He didn't mind the long hours. It was part of who he was. He had always been the kind of man to put others before himself, to lend a helping hand when needed. But tonight, all he wanted was to go home and relax with a warm meal and a good book. The city around him seemed to be winding down for the night. The streetlights hummed softly above, casting a dim amber glow across the pavement. As he walked, Nathan's thoughts turned inward, a familiar rhythm of work and responsibility echoing in his mind. He barely noticed the subtle shift in the air, the shift from routine to something much more unsettling. As he approached the alley that separated two rows of buildings, a faint sound broke through his thoughts. Soft, almost imperceptible at first, but unmistakable once his attention caught it. A cry. It wasn't loud, but it was there, fragile and filled with desperation. Nathan stopped in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. The sound was so out of place, so different from the usual hum of the city, that it sent a chill down his spine. It was a cry of pain, of fear. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the keys in his pocket. Should he investigate? His medical instincts kicked in. Whoever was crying might be in need of help, another victim of some accident or violence that occurred in the dead of night. His mind raced with possibilities, but his feet were already moving, taking him toward the alley where the sound had originated. As he stepped off the sidewalk and into the alley, the noise grew louder, a soft, pitiful sobbing. Nathan's heart raced. The alley was narrow and dark, the streetlights offering little more than flickering fragments of light, and the walls of the surrounding buildings loomed over him like silent giants. The only sound now was the boy's desperate cries. Nathan called out, his voice echoing off the brick walls. "Hey, are you okay?" There was no immediate response. Instead, the boy's sobs intensified, as if he were clinging to the smallest thread of hope that someone, anyone, might hear him. Nathan followed the sound, his steps quickening as he rounded a corner. And there, in the dim glow of a flickering streetlight, Nathan saw him. A boy, a small child, no older than 5 or 6, hunched against the cold concrete of the alleyway, his tiny form curled tightly into himself. His clothes were ragged, torn in places, and his skin was pale, too pale for a child who should be running and playing under the warmth of the sun. His face was streaked with dirt and tears, his wide, frightened eyes peering up at Nathan as if he were unsure whether to trust the stranger in front of him. The boy's small hands clutched a tattered, threadbare blanket as though it were the only thing keeping him anchored to this world. The faint glow of the streetlight illuminated his fragile form, revealing the bruises on his arms, the dirt caked beneath his nails, and the hollow look in his eyes, a look that Nathan would never forget. "Hey, buddy," Nathan said gently, kneeling in front of him. His voice was soothing, almost whisper-like, as if trying to calm the child's panic. "Are you okay?" "It's all right. You're safe now." The boy's body stiffened at the sound of Nathan's voice, but he didn't pull away. Instead, his trembling lips parted, and he looked up at Nathan with an expression that was equal parts fear and confusion. Nathan extended a hand slowly, careful not to startle him. "You don't have to be afraid. I'm here to help you." The boy's eyes shifted, glancing at Nathan's outstretched hand for a long moment before his gaze returned to Nathan's face, searching for something, anything, that might tell him this was real. This man wasn't a threat. This man wasn't going to hurt him. Nathan reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small packet of tissues. Gently, he wiped the boy's tear-streaked face, offering the soft smile. He could feel the boy's trembling, the fear coursing through him like a storm. Nathan's heart ached for this child who had been left alone in the cold, discarded like a piece of trash. "I'm Nathan," he said, keeping his tone steady, even though his heart felt as if it were breaking in his chest. "What's your name?" The boy didn't respond right away. His small body shivered uncontrollably, and he looked like he was on the brink of collapse, his chest heaving with each sob that racked his fragile body. Nathan's brow furrowed with concern. "Hey, you're freezing," he said. "We need to get you somewhere warm." The boy didn't protest as Nathan gently scooped him up into his arms. He was so light, so fragile, that Nathan almost feared he might break him. The child nestled into his chest, still clutching the blanket like a lifeline, but he didn't resist. He simply curled closer, as if finding solace in the warmth of Nathan's embrace. Nathan carried the boy to his car, his heart pounding in his chest. The fear in the child's eyes weighed heavily on him, and he knew that he had to do something. This boy, this innocent soul, was alone in the world, and Nathan wasn't going to let that continue. As Nathan drove through the darkened streets, the city feeling colder and more distant with each passing minute, his mind raced with questions. Who could leave a child like this in the street? Why had no one noticed him before? The boy was so small, so helpless. He shouldn't have been alone. Nathan's thoughts turned to the medical care the boy would need, the shelter, the food, the love he would need to heal. But Nathan also knew there were bigger questions at play. Why had this boy been abandoned? Who had done this to him? And who would come looking for him? As Nathan drove toward his home, he made a vow to the boy he now held in his arms. He would never let him feel abandoned again. He would protect him with every ounce of his being. The boy, still nestled against Nathan, began to calm, the tremors in his small body subsiding. But Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Something far darker loomed on the horizon, and Nathan had no idea what he was about to uncover. But he knew one thing for sure. Elijah, as Nathan would later decide to name him, would never be alone again. Not if Nathan had anything to do with it. The question was, who would try to tear them apart, and what would it cost them both to stay together? The secrets unravel. Nathan settled into a routine with Elijah over the following days, though a heavy cloud of uncertainty seemed to follow them wherever they went. After bringing the boy to his small apartment, Nathan called his clinic staff to let them know he wouldn't be in for the next few days. He had urgent matters to attend to. They were understanding, and Nathan appreciated their concern, but his mind was consumed with Elijah. The child, now safe in Nathan's care, barely spoke. He had been mute for days, except for the occasional tremor of sobs or whispers in his sleep. When Elijah finally ate, Nathan could see how hungry he had been, not just for food, but for affection, for human connection. It became clear to Nathan that the boy hadn't just been abandoned physically, but emotionally as well. One afternoon, as Nathan was preparing lunch, Elijah approached him cautiously. He stood in the kitchen doorway, his small figure casting a long shadow. The boy didn't speak at first. He simply stared at Nathan, eyes wide, lips slightly parted, as if choosing his words carefully. Nathan turned from the stove, giving Elijah his full attention. The boy had been silent for so long, Nathan almost thought he had forgotten how to speak. But there was something different in the air that day, something that made Nathan believe Elijah was ready to share more, ready to trust. "Elijah," Nathan asked softly, putting the spoon down and crossing the room to kneel beside the boy. "What's on your mind, buddy?" Elijah bit his lip, his eyes darting nervously to the floor before locking onto Nathan's gaze again. They said I was a mistake, he whispered, his voice trembling as though the words had been caught in his throat for a long time. They never wanted me. The words hung in the air, heavy and painful. Nathan felt a deep pang of sorrow for the boy. How could anyone say such cruel things to a child? Elijah's face, although young and innocent, was etched with the marks of abandonment and neglect. His gaze, which had once been full of uncertainty, had now shifted to something darker, something that mirrored the depths of pain he had experienced in his short life. Nathan's heart shattered at Elijah's confession, and for the first time since finding him, he was overcome with the full weight of what the child had endured. The boy didn't deserve any of it. No child did. Elijah had been so quiet up until then, and Nathan wondered how much more pain the boy was carrying inside him, hidden beneath his silence. The idea of a child being discarded, left alone in the cold, it was a nightmare Nathan couldn't shake. But there were still so many questions, so many things Nathan didn't know. Who were these people Elijah had spoken of? Why had they abandoned him? What was their connection to the boy? And why had they deemed him a mistake? "I'm sorry," Nathan said quietly, his voice full of compassion. "I don't know who they were, but I do know this. You're not a mistake. You're a gift, and I promise you, I'm not going anywhere." Elijah's wide eyes softened for a moment, a flicker of hope flashing through the pain that had consumed him. The boy's hands trembled slightly as they reached up to grasp Nathan's shirt, as if testing the security of this newfound safety. Days passed, and Nathan made it his mission to restore Elijah's sense of normalcy. He took the boy to the park, introduced him to the local library, and began teaching him simple things he should have already known at his age. But there was still a lingering unease, something Nathan couldn't quite place. Elijah was healing physically, his body no longer trembling from hunger or the cold, but emotionally, the boy seemed to be battling his own inner demons. Then came the phone call. It was late one evening when the phone rang, breaking the silence in Nathan's apartment. He had just finished reading Elijah a story before bed, a simple children's book about a boy and his dog, and had tucked him into bed. Elijah, for once, was peaceful, his breathing steady as he drifted off to sleep. But Nathan's peace was fleeting. He answered the phone on the first ring, a sense of foreboding creeping up his spine. "Dr. Daniels." The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, deep with an edge of authority that sent a shiver down Nathan's back. "Yes, this is Dr. Daniels," Nathan replied, trying to keep his voice steady despite the tension building in his chest. "Who's calling?" "You don't know me," the voice said cryptically, "but you need to listen to me carefully because time is running out." Nathan's pulse quickened. "What's going on? Who is this?" The voice paused for a moment before responding, as if weighing whether to continue. "I'm trying to help you, but you have to understand something very important. You think the boy is safe, but he's not. They've found him. They're coming for him." Nathan's blood ran cold. The words hung in the air like an ominous threat, and for a brief moment, he felt a rush of panic sweep over him. Elijah was asleep in the next room, blissfully unaware of the danger that seemed to be closing in on them. "Who's coming?" Nathan demanded, trying to keep his voice calm, but there was a sharp edge to it now. "What do you mean, they found him?" "They'll be here soon," the voice responded, the urgency growing with each word. "You need to protect him, Dr. Daniels. Whoever you think you're dealing with, you're not prepared for what's coming. Trust me, they will stop at nothing to get him back." Nathan's mind spun. What was going on? Who was this person? And what connection did they have to Elijah? "I don't understand," Nathan said, his voice low and urgent. "Who are you? What's going on?" The voice didn't answer his questions. Instead, it offered a cryptic warning. "The family behind this is powerful. Their reach extends further than you can imagine. They'll destroy anyone who stands in their way. If you want to protect him, you need to act fast. Don't trust anyone, not even the people who seem to want to help." Before Nathan could respond, The line went dead. He stood frozen for a moment, staring at the receiver in his hand, his mind racing. What family? What reach? Who was this person? And most importantly, who was coming for Elijah? He didn't know how much time they had, but it was clear that Elijah's past had caught up with him, and it wasn't about to let go. Nathan was now faced with the reality that his life and Elijah's was about to be thrust into a world of danger far beyond anything he had ever encountered. And the only thing standing between Elijah and those who wanted him was Nathan's willingness to protect him, no matter what it cost. But who could Nathan trust in a world filled with shadows, lies, and hidden motives? The answers, it seemed, would come much too late. The shadows of the past. Nathan barely slept that night. He had tried to reassure himself that the mysterious caller had been some sort of prank or mistake, but deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that the warning was far more than just idle threats. The fear in the voice, the urgency that bled through each syllable, it felt too real to ignore. When morning arrived, Nathan found himself in a state of constant alert, every sound sending his nerves into overdrive. The soft creaks of his apartment's old wood floors felt like the approaching footsteps of danger. Even Elijah, who had been peaceful and content the night before, seemed to sense the shift in the atmosphere. The boy had been quieter than usual, his wide eyes following Nathan wherever he went, as if unsure whether to trust the world outside their sanctuary. Nathan tried to go about his usual routine, preparing breakfast for Elijah, but his mind kept wandering back to the phone call. The voice had said to trust no one, not even those who might offer help. Nathan didn't know what to make of that, but it struck a chord in him. If Elijah's past was as dark and tangled as the voice had implied, Nathan had to be prepared for anything. But how could he protect the boy when he didn't even know who or what he was protecting him from? After breakfast, Nathan decided to take Elijah to the clinic. He had been meaning to give Elijah a thorough checkup for some time, and it would also allow him to think things through in the relative safety of his medical office. Perhaps the boy's health needed immediate attention, and that could serve as a distraction while Nathan tried to piece together the puzzle in his mind. Elijah was hesitant at first, clinging to Nathan's side when they arrived at the clinic. It was a small building, nestled in a quiet part of the city, and the waiting room had been empty most of the day. Nathan usually enjoyed the solitude, but today he felt anything but alone. Every shadow in the room seemed to hide something. Someone. His eyes kept darting toward the windows, scanning the streets for any sign of danger. "Come on, Elijah," Nathan coaxed softly. "We'll be in and out. Just a quick checkup." Elijah nodded, his eyes still filled with uncertainty, but Nathan could see that the boy was trying to trust him. The bond between them was growing stronger, and as they moved into the back office, Nathan tried his best to offer comfort, even if he was beginning to feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on him as well. As Nathan began to examine Elijah, a knock on the clinic door interrupted their quiet moment. Nathan's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't expecting anyone. He'd made it clear to his staff that he wouldn't be working today, and there were no scheduled appointments. "Just a moment," Nathan called out, his voice more tense than he intended. He looked at Elijah, who was staring at the door with wide eyes, his body stiff with apprehension. "Stay here," Nathan said, his tone softer now as he quickly moved toward the door. He didn't want Elijah to see any more fear than he already had. Nathan opened the door cautiously, half expecting a stranger, or worse, someone from Elijah's past, waiting for him. But to his surprise, standing in the doorway was a familiar face. It was Officer Laura Gaines, a local police officer and an old acquaintance of Nathan's. She was tall, with short-cropped dark hair, and a no-nonsense attitude that made her one of the most respected officers in the area. Nathan had known her for years, and although they were not close friends, they had worked together on occasion to help the community. Her sudden appearance was unexpected, but it was a welcome sight in the midst of his growing anxiety. "Laura, what brings you here?" Nathan asked, trying to sound calm despite the thumping of his heart. "I know this might seem out of the blue, Nathan," Laura said, her voice low and measured. "But I've got a few questions, and I think you might be able to help." Nathan's stomach twisted. He could sense that something was off, but he didn't know how to respond. His instinct told him to guard Elijah, to protect him from whatever it was Laura was here to discuss, but his professionalism kicked in. If she was here because of Elijah, he had to stay composed. "Sure, come in," Nathan said, stepping aside to let Laura into the office. "What's going on?" Laura entered, her eyes scanning the room with the sharpness of someone accustomed to detecting threats. She paused for a moment as her gaze fell on Elijah, who was sitting quietly in the corner, his small form curled into the chair, staring up at the officer. Nathan watched as Laura's expression softened briefly, but she quickly masked it, her face returning to its professional, guarded demeanor. "Elijah's been through a lot," Nathan said, his voice betraying his concern. "He's just adjusting to his new life here." Laura nodded slowly. "I can imagine. Look, Nathan, I'm not here to make things difficult for you, but I need to ask you a few questions about Elijah's background. We've been receiving some unsettling reports, and I believe his case might be tied to something much bigger than we initially thought." Nathan's chest tightened at the mention of unsettling reports. He had no idea what she was referring to, but the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. "I don't know much," Nathan replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I found Elijah abandoned in an alley. He's been through things I can't even imagine, but he's safe now. He's with me." Laura's gaze softened again, but there was an undeniable wariness in her eyes. She stepped closer to Nathan, lowering her voice. "You don't know who he is, do you?" Laura asked quietly. "Where he came from?" Nathan frowned, feeling a knot form in his stomach. "What do you mean?" "Listen, Nathan," Laura said, glancing at Elijah again, who was still watching them from the corner. "We've been looking into his case. There's a reason he was abandoned, and it's not just some random act of cruelty. There's something much darker going on here, something that involves people who have a lot of power and a lot to lose." Nathan felt his throat tighten. He had suspected there was more to Elijah's past than the boy was willing to share, but this confirmation hit him like a punch to the gut. He had thought that by taking Elijah in, he could shield him from the horrors of his past. But it seemed that Elijah's past wasn't something that could be easily buried. "What are you saying, Laura?" Nathan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What are you trying to tell me?" Before Laura could respond, there was a sound from the hallway, a loud bang that echoed through the clinic's thin walls. Nathan's eyes snapped to the door, his pulse racing as a chill of foreboding crept over him. Laura's face darkened. "We need to get out of here now." "What's going on?" Nathan asked, his body tense with fear and confusion. "There's no time to explain," Laura said urgently, grabbing Nathan's arm and pulling him toward the back exit. "We're in danger. Whoever is looking for Elijah, they're closing in." Nathan's heart pounded in his chest as he glanced at Elijah, who was now standing, frozen with fear. The boy's wide eyes locked onto his, and for the first time since Nathan had found him, the boy seemed truly terrified. "Stay close," Nathan said to Elijah, his voice steady despite the panic rising in his chest. Laura motioned for them to move quickly, her eyes scanning the clinic's narrow hallway. The world outside had just shifted from one of quiet tension to active danger, and Nathan was terrified of what would happen next. Who was coming? And how far would they go to get Elijah back? In that moment, Nathan understood the gravity of the situation. Elijah's past was not just a mystery. It was a dark and dangerous force that had already begun to unravel their lives. And no matter how hard he tried, Nathan knew he wouldn't be able to shield Elijah from the truth for much longer. It was only a matter of time before everything came to light. And when it did, Nathan feared there would be no turning back. Chasing shadows. The clinic door slammed shut behind Nathan, and the sound echoed in the empty hall, followed by the rapid footsteps of Officer Laura Gaines as she led the way through the back exit. Elijah was right behind Nathan, his small body shaking with fear, yet his wide eyes fixed on their surroundings, as if every shadow held a threat. Nathan could feel the palpable tension in the air, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. The city, which had always felt safe and familiar, now felt like a labyrinth of danger. Every corner seemed to hide something sinister, and Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The back alley was dark, lit only by the faint glow of distant street lamps. Laura moved swiftly, her military-like training taking over as she navigated the narrow path toward a nearby car. Nathan's heart raced, but he couldn't afford to show it. Not now. Elijah was relying on him, and the boy needed to see that he was calm, that he was in control. "What's happening, Laura?" Nathan asked, his voice low but urgent. "Who's after us? What do they want with Elijah?" Laura didn't answer immediately. She opened the car door, her eyes scanning the area one more time, as though ensuring they were not being followed. Once they were in, she slid into the driver's seat, and Nathan climbed into the back with Elijah. The boy immediately huddled next to him, his body trembling. Nathan rested a hand on his shoulder, trying to offer whatever comfort he could, though his own heart felt like it was racing outside his chest. "I'm sorry," Laura finally said, her voice tight. "I didn't want to involve you in this, but we don't have a choice anymore. You need to know what you're up against." Nathan's brow furrowed, his mind trying to make sense of everything. "I still don't understand. What's going on, Laura? Why do they want Elijah?" Laura started the engine, and as they pulled out of the alley, she glanced in the rearview mirror before focusing back on the road. She was silent for a moment, clearly gathering her thoughts. "You've heard of the Blackthorn family, haven't you?" she asked, her voice sharp with disdain. Nathan blinked, the name sending a cold chill through him. The Blackthorn family was a well-known name in the city, a powerful dynasty that had existed for generations. They were business moguls, philanthropists, and political influencers, with their hands in every major industry. Their wealth was vast, and their reach seemed endless. People spoke of them with a mix of awe and fear, and the rumors surrounding them were legendary. Whispers of corruption, manipulation, and shadowy dealings that no one dared to confront. "Yes," Nathan said slowly, trying to recall any specific details about the family. "But why? Why would they be interested in Elijah? He's just a boy." Laura exhaled sharply, her fingers gripping the steering wheel. "That's the part that's hard to explain, Nathan. The Blackthorn family has secrets, secrets buried so deep that most people don't even know they exist. Elijah's one of them. He's not just any boy. His connection to the Blackthorns is much darker than you can imagine." Nathan's mind reeled, struggling to process what Laura was saying. Elijah had been abandoned, left to die in a trash heap, and now the most powerful family in the city was after him. It didn't make sense. What was it about this child that could tie him to a family like the Blackthorns? "Laura, you're not making sense," Nathan said, his voice rising with frustration. "What do you mean by he's one of them? How can a boy like Elijah be connected to them?" "I don't have all the details," Laura replied, her voice shaky now, betraying the depth of her own fear. "But I know that Elijah was born into the Blackthorn family. He's not just a normal child. He's the heir to something they've been trying to hide for years." Nathan's stomach dropped, and his heart pounded in his chest. The heir. The words reverberated through his mind, like a terrible echo. Elijah, this innocent child, was tied to the Blackthorn family. But what could he possibly inherit? What was it that they needed so badly that they would go to such extremes? Before Nathan could ask more questions, Laura spoke again, her tone urgent. "You have to understand, Nathan. The Blackthorns don't lose control over their assets. Elijah, as much as they've tried to bury him, is still a piece of their legacy. And they won't stop until they get him back. They'll go to any lengths to ensure that happens." Nathan's eyes flicked to Elijah, who was sitting in the back seat, his small face pale and filled with confusion. He didn't understand any of this. He was just a boy alone in a world that seemed to be turning upside down. Elijah was quiet now, though his eyes were fixed on Nathan, searching for answers in the man who had saved him from the streets. "What exactly is it that they want from Elijah?" Nathan asked, his voice low, as though afraid the question would set off something even worse. "They want to reclaim him," Laura said, her voice tight with anger. "And when I say reclaim, I don't mean as a family member. They want to use him as a tool for their own purposes. You see, Elijah is the last piece of the puzzle. The Blackthorns have been hiding the secret for decades, something that could change the world, something that gives them unimaginable power. Elijah is the key to that power." Nathan felt his pulse race. What secret could possibly be worth all this? He had known for a long time that there were things in this world beyond ordinary comprehension. But this was something entirely different. Elijah wasn't just an abandoned child. He was the center of something far larger, something more dangerous. And the Blackthorn family was prepared to do anything to reclaim him. But why abandon him in the first place? Nathan asked. If he's so important, why was he left to die in a trash can? It doesn't make sense. Laura's grip on the wheel tightened, and she glanced briefly at Nathan in the rearview mirror. Because they had no choice. There were forces within the family who didn't want Elijah to be found, who didn't want him to inherit whatever it is they're hiding. But there's always someone who knows, someone who remembers. And that's why they came for him. That's why they're still looking. Nathan's mind was spinning, but the most pressing question still hung in the air. What was the Blackthorn family hiding? What was it that made Elijah so important? He had saved the boy, taken him in, and vowed to protect him. But now the stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just about a child needing a home anymore. This was about something far greater, something that could unravel everything Nathan thought he knew about the world. "We can't just run," Nathan said, his voice determined despite the rising panic in his chest. "We need to find out everything we can about the Blackthorns. We need to know what they want with Elijah and why they'll stop at nothing to get him back." Laura nodded, her expression hardening. "I agree, but we need to be careful. The Blackthorns don't just have money and power. They have influence. They have eyes everywhere. If we don't move fast and smart, we'll be walking right into a trap." Nathan looked at Elijah again, whose innocent eyes were filled with confusion and fear. Elijah's life had been one of abandonment and betrayal, but now, it seemed his existence was the key to something far more dangerous. Nathan couldn't let him slip away. He had promised to protect him, and he would do whatever it took to keep that promise. "We'll find out the truth," Nathan said, his voice filled with resolve. "And we'll protect Elijah, no matter what it takes." But deep down, Nathan knew the truth. They were playing a game against forces far larger than they could imagine. And as much as he wanted to believe he could protect Elijah, the shadows of the past were closing in, and they were about to discover just how far the Blackthorns would go to keep their secrets buried. The web of deception. The night air grew colder as Nathan and Elijah sat in the back seat of the car, the dim glow of streetlights flickering past as Laura steered the vehicle through the winding streets of the city. It felt as though the world outside had been swallowed by an unseen fog, thick with the secrets the Blackthorn family had kept hidden for so long. Nathan's mind churned with questions, each one more unsettling than the last. The Blackthorns were powerful, yes, but how could they have kept such a dangerous secret hidden for so long? And why had they chosen Elijah, this quiet boy who seemed to be no more than a casualty of their legacy? Elijah's soft voice interrupted Nathan's thoughts. "Where are we going?" he asked, his eyes flicking nervously from Nathan to Laura. Nathan glanced at the boy, offering a small but reassuring smile. "We're going to a safe place, Elijah. Don't worry. You're going to be okay." The boy nodded, though there was a wariness in his gaze. His tiny hand reached out to grip Nathan's, seeking comfort in the only person he felt he could trust. Nathan's heart ached, and he squeezed the boy's hand gently. Laura didn't speak for a while, her focus entirely on the road ahead. But the tension in the air was suffocating. The atmosphere felt thick with danger, like the calm before a storm, but the storm was already closing in, and no one could see it coming. Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that there were eyes on them from the shadows. His instincts told him to trust Laura, but even her presence in the car couldn't quell the unease gnawing at him. After what felt like an eternity, Laura spoke again, her voice soft but grave. "We need to get to an old acquaintance of mine, someone who can help us get more information. There's a lot we don't know, Nathan, but we can't afford to be ignorant about what's coming for Elijah." Nathan nodded, though he was still reeling from the information he'd learned. The more Laura revealed, the darker the reality seemed. Elijah's ties to the Blackthorns weren't just about blood. They were connected to something far more sinister, a hidden agenda that was being pursued with ruthless determination. But what was it? What power could a child like Elijah possibly possess that would be worth this kind of pursuit? "We're not safe yet," Laura continued, her voice low and urgent. "But I know someone who's deep enough in the Blackthorn world that they can help us. We just have to reach him before they do." Nathan's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror. "How do you know we can trust him? If he's in the Blackthorn world, doesn't that mean he's part of the problem?" "I know," Laura replied with a heavy sigh. "But sometimes, the only way to fight something this big is to get inside it. We'll have to play by their rules to understand what they want with Elijah. I don't trust him completely, but right now, we don't have much of a choice." As the car continued through the streets, Nathan couldn't help but think of the boy sitting next to him. Elijah's small hand was still clutching his, and despite the uncertainty, the boy remained quiet, his eyes filled with unspoken questions. What had he been through? What had he witnessed in his short life that had caused him to be abandoned in such a cruel way? Nathan knew there was so much more to the boy than he had ever let on, but what? They drove for another half hour, the city streets becoming less familiar as they neared the outskirts of town. The buildings grew more spaced out, the streetlights dimmer. Eventually, Laura turned onto a narrow road that wound through dense trees, the car's headlights casting long, eerie shadows across the path. Nathan's anxiety rose with every turn. They were heading into uncharted territory, and it was impossible to shake the feeling that danger was lurking just beyond their reach. The car came to a halt in front of a rundown warehouse, its windows boarded up, and the door barely hanging on its hinges. The building had a sinister aura, like a place where secrets were buried, forgotten, and left to fester. Nathan hesitated for a moment, glancing at Elijah, who seemed just as apprehensive as he was. "This is the place," Laura said, her voice clipped. She turned to Nathan. "Stay close, and don't trust anyone here." "Not yet. We're only here for information." Nathan nodded, though a sense of foreboding continued to creep along his spine. He glanced at Elijah one more time before opening the door and stepping out of the car, the cold air biting at his skin. The boy followed him closely, and Nathan held onto his hand tightly as they approached the entrance of the warehouse. Laura led the way, her steps quick and purposeful. The door creaked loudly as she pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit interior. The place smelled of dust, oil, and something faintly metallic. The only sound was the faint echo of their footsteps on the concrete floor. "Stay close," Laura whispered again as they ventured further into the dark interior. "We're almost there." The warehouse was large, its high ceiling lost in shadows, and the walls lined with rows of old crates and machinery. The air felt thick with neglect, as though no one had set foot in this place for years. Nathan's senses were on high alert, his every step calculated. But then, from the darkness ahead, a figure emerged, tall, with broad shoulders, and a stern expression that spoke of experience and authority. He was dressed in a dark suit, his face partially obscured by the dim light. Laura stopped in front of him, nodding once. "Read." The man's eyes flicked between Nathan and Elijah, and then he spoke, his voice low and gravelly. "Laura, I assume this is the boy. Nathan stiffened. This was Reed, the person Laura had mentioned, and already he didn't like the way the man looked at Elijah. The intensity in his gaze was unsettling, as though he were seeing something Nathan couldn't. "This is Elijah," Nathan said, stepping forward. "And I'm here because I need answers. We need to know what's happening, what the Blackthorns want with him." Reed studied them both, his gaze lingering on Elijah. There was a strange flicker in his eyes, something Nathan couldn't quite place. He looked like a man who had seen too much, someone with secrets of his own. "I know what you're after," Reed said finally, "but this isn't something you can just walk into. The Blackthorns don't play by the rules. They never have." Nathan felt a surge of frustration. "Then tell me what I need to know. We don't have time to waste." Reed's expression hardened, and for a moment, Nathan feared the man might shut them out entirely. But after a long pause, he spoke again, his voice measured. "All right. But you need to understand, once you know this, there's no turning back. The Blackthorns won't just let you walk away. Not after what you've learned." Nathan's heart raced, but he knew this was the only way forward. They were in too deep now, and there was no going back. "The Blackthorn family is more than just a dynasty," Reed continued. "They're part of something older, something that goes back centuries. Elijah is the key to a legacy that's been hidden for generations. The Blackthorns weren't just trying to hide him. They were trying to control him. And now that you've found him, Nathan, you've become a part of that legacy too, whether you like it or not." Nathan's blood ran cold as Reed's words sank in. He had thought that rescuing Elijah had been an act of kindness, a simple decision to save a boy from a life of despair. But now it was clear. There was nothing simple about Elijah's existence, and nothing simple about the forces they were up against. As Reed's cryptic words hung in the air, Nathan felt the weight of the situation settle over him like a shroud. Elijah's past was more dangerous and complex than he had ever imagined. And now, it seemed that he was in the middle of a storm that had been brewing for far longer than he had known. The Blackthorns were coming, and they weren't just coming for Elijah. They were coming for everything. Nathan had no idea what the next move would be, but one thing was certain. He would protect Elijah, no matter the cost. Even if it meant taking on a legacy he didn't understand. Even if it meant facing an enemy that was far more powerful than he could have ever anticipated. There was no turning back. The unraveling truth. The tension in the warehouse hung heavy in the air, as though the very walls were conspiring to keep secrets hidden. Nathan's mind raced, absorbing Reed's cryptic words, but the more he learned, the more questions arose. How could Elijah be connected to something so dangerous, so ancient? What exactly was this legacy, and why was the Blackthorn family willing to kill to keep it a secret? As Reed spoke, Nathan's thoughts shifted between confusion and determination. He had promised to protect Elijah. The boy had been abandoned, left in the trash, and Nathan had rescued him, offering him the love and safety he had been deprived of. But now, it seemed the boy wasn't just a victim of circumstance. He was at the heart of something far darker and more dangerous. And as Nathan's pulse quickened with the weight of the information, a voice deep inside him whispered that it wasn't just Elijah's life that was at risk. The truth itself had the power to unravel everything. Laura stood nearby, her arms crossed, her eyes darting around the room as though she too was preparing for something, waiting for Reed's explanation to come to its painful conclusion. The air in the warehouse was thick with anticipation, and the dim light seemed to cast long shadows, making it hard to tell who was friend and who was foe. Reed's gaze remained fixed on Elijah, and the boy, sensing the intensity, clung to Nathan's side, his small body trembling slightly. "Nathan," Reed began again, his voice measured and serious. "I need you to understand that you're not just involved in this by coincidence. Elijah's connection to the Blackthorns goes beyond blood. This family, they've been hiding something for centuries. And Elijah, he's the key to it all." Nathan's brow furrowed as he struggled to keep up. The key to what, Reed? What exactly are they hiding? Reed didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved toward a metal filing cabinet in the corner of the room and opened it. He pulled out a stack of papers, old, yellowed documents, and set them on a nearby table. As Nathan and Laura moved closer, Reed gestured for them to examine the papers. "These," Reed said, his voice quiet, "are records of the Blackthorne family's history, records that no one outside of their inner circle has ever seen. They're part of a bloodline that traces back to an ancient order, one that holds incredible power, a power that they've been hiding for centuries." Nathan glanced at the papers, trying to make sense of the words on the page. The handwriting was barely legible, and the language was archaic, almost foreign. But as he skimmed through the pages, certain phrases caught his attention. Legacy of the forgotten, heir to the order, bloodline of the ancients. The more he read, the more the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Elijah wasn't just a boy. He was a key player in a centuries-old conspiracy, one that had been buried beneath layers of lies and deceit. "This order," Nathan muttered, almost to himself. "It sounds like something out of a legend. What exactly do they want with Elijah?" Reed's face darkened, and he ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling with how much he could reveal. "The Blackthorns don't want Elijah because of who he is. They want him because of what he is. Elijah is the last of a bloodline that can unlock the power of the order, a power that has the potential to reshape the world. The family has been hunting for the perfect heir for generations, and Elijah is the one they've been searching for." Nathan's stomach churned as the weight of Reed's words sank in. Elijah wasn't just a pawn in their family's twisted game. He was the linchpin, the one who could unlock something so dangerous that the Blackthorns would stop at nothing to claim it. "You're telling me they want Elijah to unlock some kind of power?" Nathan asked, his voice strained. "What kind of power are we talking about here?" "It's not just any power," Reed replied, his voice grim. "It's the power to control something ancient, something that could change the course of history. The Blackthorns have been trying to find the right person for generations, someone who can bring the order back to its full strength. And Elijah is the last piece of the puzzle." Nathan looked at the boy beside him, who was now clutching his arm, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. Elijah didn't understand what was happening. Not fully, but Nathan could see the terror in his eyes. The boy wasn't just afraid of the Blackthorns, he was afraid of himself. "They'll stop at nothing to get him back," Reed continued, his voice sharp. "The Blackthorns will use any means necessary to capture him. And if they succeed..." Nathan's heart sank as he realized the full scope of what was at stake. What happens if they succeed? "They'll unleash the power of the order," Reed said quietly, "and they'll use it to gain control of everything. The Blackthorns won't just control the city. They'll control entire governments, corporations, and organizations. They'll be untouchable, unstoppable, and they won't care who they have to destroy to get what they want." Nathan's mind raced as he tried to process the enormity of Reed's words. The Blackthorns weren't just some rich family vying for power. They were part of something far more dangerous, something that could shake the foundations of the world. And Elijah, the boy he had promised to protect, was the key to it all. "How do we stop them?" Nathan asked, his voice low and urgent. "What can we do to prevent this from happening?" Reed hesitated for a moment, his eyes flicking to Laura before returning to Nathan. "We need to find out everything we can about the order, its origins, its rituals, its weaknesses. There's a way to stop them, but it won't be easy. We'll need to get to the heart of the Blackthorn family, find the secrets they've buried for centuries, and expose them for the world to see." Laura stepped forward, her face set in a determined expression. "We're running out of time. The Blackthorns won't wait for us to make our move. They'll be coming for Elijah soon, and when they do, we have to be ready. The only way to protect him is to get ahead of them, to understand what they're after before they can use him." Nathan glanced at Elijah, whose face was pale and eyes wide with confusion. The boy was trembling, clearly overwhelmed by everything happening around him. Nathan knew Elijah couldn't understand the full weight of the situation, but Nathan had seen enough in the boy's eyes to know that he wasn't just a helpless victim. Elijah had been through too much already, and he was more resilient than anyone could give him credit for. But even Elijah couldn't fight a family as powerful and ruthless as the Blackthorns. They were about to face a battle on a scale Nathan could barely comprehend. "We're not going to let them take you, Elijah," Nathan whispered, bending down to meet the boy's gaze. "I promise. We'll figure this out together." But even as Nathan spoke those words, he knew that the fight was far from over. The Blackthorns were coming, and they weren't going to stop until they had Elijah back. It was only a matter of time before the storm hit, and when it did, everything would change. The truth about Elijah's past, the Order, and the Blackthorns' dark legacy would all come crashing down, and Nathan would have to do whatever it took to protect the boy, no matter the cost.